It's a little past 7 on a Thursday night. That means it's time for Women's Issues, Women's Voices here on KOPN Columbia 89.5 FM. I would like to point out that NQR Productions, in support of KOPN, presents the 2014 Elderberry Festival, a celebration of art and music, which is coming up June 6th and 7th. 22 bands on 2 stages, a weekend of camping, dancing, learning, singing, hiking, snacking, picking, and campground grinning in downtown Lupus, Missouri. Over 23 hours of music. More information at www.elderberryfestival.com. And I'm your host tonight for Women's Issues, Sarah Catlin, and with me I have Tracy Greever-Rice.
Hello.
And DeAnna Walkenbach.
Hello.
And I can hear you both. That's a good start to a conversation, being able to hear one another. And you guys, you who are faithful listeners at home might remember Tracy was here a month ago? About a month ago on the show I did with Nellie Simgrunder. She had the first 10 minutes talking about a repeal petition, and we're back to talk about the same thing, but we're going to talk about it for the whole hour tonight. So if you like local politics and you like to get down and dirty and talk about what's going on at City Hall, this is the hour for you.
Thank you, Sarah, very much for having us here.
Sure. I figure KOPN is a community radio station. Where else is there a more appropriate place to talk about community issues? And this is truly a community issue for us here. Is. Tracy, do you want to start a little bit by revisiting your last visit here for those at home who might not have been following this or maybe don't get the paper?
Certainly. In mid-March, there was a special council meeting called. There was a compressed time period to move through 3 different development projects. And essentially they called 2 noontime meetings with a regular Monday night council meeting in between, passed 2 of 3 of the development agreements in slightly less than a week. And folks were very concerned about both the process and the fact that these very large development projects were coming immediately following a period where we talked about the TIF, and the TIF had failed, and we'd been told over and over again that there was no way to do any further development if the TIF did not pass because we couldn't finance to fix infrastructure that is apparently in very, very poor shape, particularly when it rains. And
which it never does in spring.
Right, which it never does in Missouri. And in response to the very, very irregular process and unresponded to concerns about infrastructure and the fact that the developments are, particularly the one that was petitioned, the OPUS development, is not in conformance with not just one, but several different plans for downtown that have been visited and revisited over almost a 20-year period. We went out and did a petition, which is an allowed process by our city charter, which is the foundational document for city governance. Ordinances are sort of process responses to various things that cities have to do, but the charter is like our Constitution, and within that we have the right to petition any ordinance that we're concerned about. And what the petition does, if it gets enough signatures, which is 25% of folks who voted in the last mayoral election, is it gives the council the choice to either accept the repeal of the petitioned ordinance or to put it onto the next electoral ballot as a referendum, and then the people can vote it up or down. So we went through that process, got enough signatures on our second try, and this was confirmed at this last Monday night's council meeting.
And you thought you had enough.
We thought we had enough.
But they weren't verified in some way, and so then you have a second chance then to go collect a few more, because you were so close.
That's right. So the first time you do it, you've got 20 days to get it done and turned in, and then once you've turned them in and they've checked them, if there are not enough signatures, then you have another 14 days to turn them in. So we got that part done, but in response to it, instead of accepting the petition or putting it on the ballot at the next referendum, the city did sort of an end run around us and essentially said, okay, well, that ordinance has been petitioned, so we're just going to take a look at the same development plan and put it through under a new numbered ordinance and pass it like that. And that's what they did. And so the only response that we really can have to a situation like that is to say, oh no, our charter rights count, and we're going to respond to that by petitioning this one too. So that's where we are today.
Mm-hmm. All right. DeAnna, would you like to take a turn to talk?
Well, I wanted to say, I know a lot of people are saying, well, why didn't you do a petition against the other developments? Well, that were done in that same process period. And the reason we didn't is because one of them withdrew, and the other one is over at Conley and 5th Street, and they had already gotten a demolition permit, and they'd already demolished the houses over there. They owned the land. They were ready to build. And we felt that they deserved to be able to do it because they were so far along in the process. We just didn't think we should stop them. So I just want to make that clear because people seem to think it's only OPUS that we're after, and it's not at all. They just happen to be not as far along in the process. In fact, they don't own the lots currently that they want to build on. They have not yet closed on those.
I read an article preparing for the night that said they put down some earnest money, but they'll get that back if it doesn't go through.
They should.
So they shouldn't
really
be out
should.
anything. They're out maybe some time.
And
maybe
attorney's fees.
And attorney's fees.
Right.
Which, yeah.
Exactly.
So, do you want to talk, where do we want to start? We want to start with the city council meeting? Do we want to start with, there was a city council meeting Monday night, and that's where OPUS brought a second development plan. Do either of you want to speak to that?
Correct.
A revised
They brought
plan.
Another development agreement, and essentially the only thing that changed was that they were going to have apartments on the ground floor. They were going to have apartments all the way up. Originally. And they came back and said they would put their amenities, meaning their gym and their meeting rooms and that sort of stuff, on the ground floor. And that's essentially the only thing that changed in that second development agreement. And to us, it wasn't enough because we still don't have the infrastructure.
Right, and just to be clear, the addition of the shared space is not even a new addition. It's just a rearrangement of how they were going to use the space.
Yes.
So they gave up. They gave up nothing. There was no
give and take.
No, there was no give and take at all. It was just rearranging furniture.
And they were saying that was in response to. I watched the city council meeting, and the man from OPUS who spoke from St. Louis said that he felt that was a appropriate response to the request for retail space, but he said it didn't have to be retail. It just had to be, was it community space? Is that the phrase they were using? Or open? I should have written it down or rewatched it. It was late by the time I got to it Monday night. As you both know, it was very late.
Well, basically, I think...
But they wanted more open kind of streets, accessible space.
Instead of doors on the...
Or nothing,
on
windows
the bottom
and brick.
Floor, they're saying, well, now this is going to open it up. There'll be windows, and you can watch people work out if you want to. You know?
Right. It's, I think, active space.
Active space.
Active space
is
the term.
That's the phrase.
The euphemism that they've been using. And I think it's worth pointing out, and, it's interesting to sort of do the research and look into these things. At the Monday night council meeting, the guy from OPUS said very clearly that they've done 6 luxury student housing developments.
In other cities.
Lawrence
cities. And all over the place. Milwaukee was one.
They've done, not Lawrence, but...
was there not?
No, they've done a couple in Minneapolis, I believe. They've done one in Madison. They've done one in Ann Arbor. They've done one in Ames, Iowa. They're working on one in Des Moines.
Yeah.
And of all of those... 5 of the 6 of which are pretty much exactly what they're talking about here. 6-story buildings with about the same number of beds.
Right.
The one in Ann Arbor is actually twice that tall. It's 13 stories.
Oh,
but every single one of those are built with retail space on the ground floor. So the first time the ordinance came through in March, they were asked, can we have retail on the first floor to conform with the Avenue of the Columns plan and the Sasaki plan and the visioning plan and plan after plan after plan, the new comp plan? And they said, oh, no, we don't do retail. So I guess they just don't do retail here, but they certainly have several designs, all of which are pretty similar to each other, that it looks a little bit like what they're going to do here, but they all include retail on the first floor.
And I think at the city council meeting, didn't somebody ask for clarification, and then did he come back later in the meeting and he said, well, we do retail, but we did a study here and we decided that it wouldn't be financially feasible.
Yeah,
am I making that up?
That.
Sorry.
I think he did say that.
Yeah, so their guy came back from OPUS and said, you're right, we do retail sometimes, But when we looked, we don't think we'll get enough foot traffic to, basically, he didn't say this in word for word, but, there's not enough foot traffic or whatever to make ends meet. Like, the places won't fill and people won't come, and so it would hurt us financially to put retail space. And that was his answer, as I recall, more or less.
Sure, that was his answer. I'm not quite sure I fully understand his answer. There's the campus immediately to the south, where they expect to have a lot of foot traffic and retail, or traffic and people back and forth from. There's the Flat Branch developed area and the Lucky's and area to the west, and there's a great deal of downtown to the north and east. So you would think if you were going to put several hundred people there, plus the rest of downtown, that
you could
just put a coffee shop in there. I bet all the tenants would use that.
Right.
Yeah.
You would think. I don't know a lot about business, but it's my understanding that retail space rents for a lot more than bedroom space. And so if they could keep it rented, that's how a lot of buildings really pay for themselves, is that first floor retail. It's not the apartments above. Well, that's my understanding.
That's right. And a coffee shop with tables in it that will be filled with tables for a community meeting room would just be somebody making some money off of that. And it's not just money for a potential business, but by developing something that is exclusively residential in the middle of your central business district, and refusing to put any commercial space in it, we're losing sales tax dollars.
That's true.
For the long
I always
run.
love having you on because you think of this stuff. It never occurs to me, but you're right. Of course.
So we will get an increase in property tax because what they're going to put in is going to be valued at more than what is currently there. But we're giving up the chance to ever be able to realize ongoing revenue from sales tax in that space. A full block of downtown.
It's a big block.
It
right
is
in the
a big
center.
block.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of some of the other arguments. Do you want to talk a little bit about all the kerfluffle flying around? I keep hearing the word lawsuit. The city's going to be sued by OPUS, and individual city council members are personally liable, and they could personally be sued, and council members could lose their homes and their jobs and their livelihoods. And that doesn't seem right to me. Why would anyone take elected office if they were opening themselves up? Really, I mean, people can sue anyone. I know you could be sued for anything, and it could just be thrown out. I mean, anybody can sue you for something that didn't even happen. But is anyone on council really, how much risk are they taking on when someone takes a council seat?
Well,
there has to be some kind of built-in protections, right? Or nobody would do it.
We're told by our attorneys that that is absolutely not true. That they are not.
Council members are not at a great amount of
they're
risk.
not at great risk personally for a lawsuit.
I wonder.
So, I mean, I'm going to take them at their word.
Right. And, if that was a very real risk, you would think that there would be stories of it that we could validate immediately and easily. And I've done a little poking around, and I can't find an example
of another city with this form of government where someone was successfully sued.
And in Columbia.
Or in Columbia.
Now, I will say that when you are there are two entities in the city of Columbia for which a person serving on those can be theoretically held personally liable. One of them is council, and the other one is the Board of Adjustment. And I served on the Board of Adjustment for a while, and they tell you when you start it, this is a possibility of something that could happen. And I actually looked myself up on CaseNet yesterday, and I got a speeding ticket in the mid-'90s. And I was named on a case several years ago when I was on the Board of Adjustment with all the other members and a bunch of city staff and council. Over a deal, ironically, that involved Stan Kroenke and some of his business deals. But essentially, it was a case where somebody was upset that they couldn't put a cell tower where they wanted to, and threatened to bring a suit. Nothing comes as in any lawsuit. There's the primary party that is being sued, typically who has the deep pockets, and in the case of a city, an insurance policy to protect itself from being sued and pay damages if there are any, and then everybody else falls in line. So for a city council person in Columbia to actually be liable, they would have to do something actionable to be liable.
So,
and just
by actionable, you mean doing something outside of the scope of their job that was not a lawful thing?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Or
that makes sense to me.
Or immoral.
Yes.
Yes. That makes sense to me. That's how it should work. That's how I would think it would work. Well, Jenny Chadwick sat at the city council meeting, and she was frightened.
Yes, she was.
I mean, she looked very, to me, I felt sorry for her because she looked visibly shaken. And when she was doing her little rebuttal, or not rebuttal, but like her why I'm going to vote how I vote, she talked at some length, and she said, I found out that I personally could be sued over this. And she even restated it. She said it more than once.
Well, the city attorney agreed with her.
Right, which is, whoever has let any of council understand this in a context where they feel very threatened.
Did she not look threatened to the two of you? Because she looked frightened.
That's
to me.
right.
She was frightened.
I felt horrible.
It is shameful.
I thought so.
That she felt that level of intimidation, and it is shameful for whoever informed her in a way that she felt like that.
I agree. Yeah. If nothing else comes from tonight's conversation, I hope we can clear the air about that for anyone listening, because no one should be intimidated like that. Certainly not someone who has volunteered and run for a city election and is more or less volunteering their time. And would they get paid now? But it's a pittance. I mean,
right.
It's not much.
No, it's not even enough to cover their parking, probably. They park downtown every time they have to come to a meeting, frankly.
Let alone all the time they spend.
All the time they spend, and email and phone calls. So then to be threatened, basically. I mean, it's with your home and your...
Note that the sole attorney on the council didn't seem to be concerned at all.
And I don't know if that's because I don't know the city attorney. It's a woman. I saw her there.
Barb Hoppy is the only elected council person right now who's actually an attorney.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And she was unfazed.
Unfazed. Well, maybe she'll take Jenny aside and calm her down, because I just felt terrible.
It was bad.
It was frightening. It was awful to watch. It made me feel sick. Let's see. So we talked about that the council members aren't personally liable. We don't think, in our lay judgment and in your lawyer's judgment that you've talked to, and Tracy couldn't find any basis for this kind of story.
Correct.
What about the argument that OPUS could sue the city over this? What would you say to people that say, we have to pass this development through because if we don't, they're going to sue us?
OPUS could sue the city.
Anybody could.
Anybody can sue anybody.
Right.
Anybody with a $125 filing fee in hand can sue anybody. It depends on where they're at in the development process, what kind of damage they have. They could claim. And they're not very, as far as we know, they're not very far.
No.
They don't own the land.
When did you last check it, DeAnna? As of
last Friday. Last Friday, I called the county.
And the earnest money was still there, and nothing had happened.
And they had not filed to record anything closed. So, as of last Friday, they had not closed on the properties.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Jenny Chadwick's argument, her main argument was, these guys followed the rules. The first time they didn't. That's why they had to go back through council. They kind of bucked the system the first time, and I don't think that was there on them at all, on OPUS at all. It just I think the city did it. But now that it's gone through the second time, her main argument was, they've gone through the process, they've done everything they were supposed to do, they're even offering a little extra money. We can't, in good faith, deny them what they want to do, because they followed the rules. If you don't like this, change the rules. That was her. Would you agree that I'm glossing that fairly accurately? Yeah. I don't want to misspeak for her. And I've heard that from other people too. I'm just stating her because it was on public record at the city council meeting, but I'm sure other people I've heard have had that same opinion. The OPUS followed the rules, they filled out their paperwork, they paid their stuff, and they went through all the process. And so how can we possibly deny them to do what they want to do when they're following our rules? That the rules are actually what's at fault, because we don't have good rules in place for what kind of development we want. And so we need to let them do what they want and then change the rules so that we close all whatever.
Well, I think that one of the ways to get around that is that the city is promising to have $10 million worth of infrastructure in place by 2015.
Yeah, was it July 2015?
And they're promising they're going to have it, and they don't know where the money's coming from. And we know where the money's coming from. I'm sure, it's going to come from you and me and Tracy and all the other taxpayers. But in the development agreement that was signed by the city manager, the first one, that was promised, and there is also a clause in there that says what does it say, Tracy, that if we can't provide something that's within the development agreement, it can be null and void?
Right. So,
Yeah.
so essentially, they can walk away, but we can't.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, I mean, to me, that's the biggest thing. And I've said this over and over. You don't run your household that way. You don't run your business that way. And you certainly shouldn't run a city by saying you're going to pay for something that you don't even know where the money's coming from. And that's huge. I just think that's a huge piece.
And also in response to this idea that they've, quote unquote, gone through the process, there are a couple things about that bother me. And one of them is that, we're here in the first place because...
Here at the station tonight.
Well, we're in this situation as a city tonight because...
With our building
Yeah.
Because of a series of sort of political strategies that played out through the winter in terms of trying to get a large central city TIF district in place, in which case the city administration, the city manager's office, played fast and loose with telling people different sort of ideas and stories about what kind of capacity we had. And quite frankly, OPUS got a bad deal about it too. They were going through process, much like the one at 5th and Conley, doing their thing according to the rules, and they essentially got their project backburnered for months while the city manager's office had to happen. It was a but-for situation. If we didn't pass that, there wouldn't be the financing and no way to do these projects. And so... we
didn't pass it.
Then we didn't pass it. And then, lo and behold, there is a way to do them. And OPUS got caught up in that. And they got the special meeting schedule, the very compressed meeting schedule was sort of a payback to them for being backburnered for a long time. And they were included in that, along with the project that was much farther down the road, by claiming they had an April 1st deadline, and if they didn't have approval by that April 1st deadline, then their project was going to die. Well, it's past April 1st, and on it goes. Then they told the city that if they didn't throw out the petition by April 22nd, and that's come and gone, and nobody ensued, and they had another that they had to have done, within this last week's council time frame that we just passed, and so it goes. And now they're going to have a 6-story building up and ready to go in a year and 30 days.
Yes.
Without any infrastructure in place or prepared for. So it's a house of cards everywhere. And all you have to do is blow hard, and it's all going to come down and will be a mess for us.
Yes, it will be. I mean, we're looking at basements flooding with sewage.
They already do.
We already have that.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah. But go ahead. The one other point about process is part of the intended process, the spirit of the process in our community for passing ordinances is that there are public hearings where council considers the opinion of other folks. In this particular situation, we had a majority of council people before the first reading of the second ordinance who had said publicly, we've decided how we're going to vote. Process has not been served.
Yeah.
We haven't done this one right yet.
Well, and that brings us to the trust issue. I think, many citizens, as many signatures as we got, we heard that very often, that they're in our city government. I'm not sure how they can gain it back. I really don't know.
This is something I definitely want to talk about this hour. Let's take a quick break and let us catch our breath. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Women's Issues, Women's Voices. I'm Sarah Catlin. I've got Tracy Greever-Rice and DeAnna Walkenbach with me. We're talking about the OPUS development downtown and various related issues. And when we come back, we're going to pick up with this thread about trust and city government, and maybe talk a little bit about the structure of city government and some maybe broader issues. I want to say a quick welcome to our listeners, our loyal listener in Lynn, Massachusetts, whoever you are. I see that you tuned in right when the hour started, and somebody in Coppell, Texas. So thanks for tuning in. I see that you're listening, and welcome. And I hope we're interesting you with our local politics. Maybe you're from here and on vacation. I hope that's the case. But we'll be back in just a minute with Women's Issues, Women's Voices.
Some of the funds for this program are brought to you by Ragtag Cinema, Columbia's premier art house movie theater. More information regarding showtimes and tickets available at 443-4359 or at ragtagfilm.com.
Mama could plow a field with one hand and chop a log just as well as a man. When it came to increasing disease resistance, that woman could lactate like nobody's business. Mama's nursing help raise a healthy family. There's nothing she wouldn't do. She helped us kids get through with less risk for ear infections and respiratory illnesses. When I think of Mama, brings a tear to my eye. She gave from her heart or somewheres nearby. Call 800-994-WOMAN or visit 4woman.gov to learn more, or talk to your healthcare provider. These babies were born to be breastfed exclusively for 6 months. This public service message brought to y'all by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Ad Council, and this station. Y'all breastfeed now, you hear?
Hey, we're the Diddy Bops, and you're listening to 89.5 FM KOPN Columbia Community Radio.
And we're back with Women's Issues. We've got Tracy Greever-Rice and DeAnna Walkenbach in the studio, and we're talking about the OPUS agreement downtown and city development in general and city government in general. And right before the break, we were talking, DeAnna had opened an interesting topic talking about larger issues of trust with recent developments downtown with our city government. Is this a good time to talk about the bond rating issue?
Yeah, I think.
You want to explain that a little bit?
Sure. In the period during the first petitioning process, the mayor brought up several times that the city of Columbia could be at risk of having its bond rating lowered. And the bond rating is the sort of the report card for a city, and how well a city does affects things like what kind of interest rate they can borrow money at, which is the big thing. And bond ratings are based on how well the city does things like manage its money, primarily. So does it have enough money in funds to support retirement pensions? Does it have a good ratio of debt to equity? Is it, when it's audited, when it has management audits, does it appear that it's using its money wisely, that it's staffed correctly, that it pays its own people correctly, that it pays its bills on time? Those sort of things. When I was talking to one of the attorneys for Repeal 6214 about the possibility of a citizens movement affecting a community's bond rating, he laughed and said the last time that a citizens movement affected a city's bond rating is when a government's bond rating was the American Revolution. Oh. You know, it's not public protests that affect that. It's the way the city does its own business.
Which in some ways, I think, if we say we're going to provide the infrastructure and we don't have the money for it, that could affect the bond rating more so than
that would be an actual practical issue.
Yes,
something that would show up on books somewhere that an accountant would see.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Or if we promised to have something ready infrastructure-wise for people to build on and it's not there and we don't have any way to put it there,
right,
and then we default to a developer, then that's going to affect the bond rating. But people holding their government accountable will not affect our bond rating. There is a little bit of that I'm slightly worried about. Standard & Poor's, which is one of the big companies that rates bonds, that rates cities, and gives them their report card, has changed their formulas for how they do that. And many cities across the country have had a minor adjustment in their bond ratings, both up and down. And I don't know if that's something that the city of Columbia is concerned about, but those are larger economic, political forces than what's going on here. But people showing up at meetings and speaking their mind is not going to affect our bond rating.
I want to mention, before I forget, because I jotted it down on my notes here, if we've piqued your interest about Monday night's City Council meeting, it is available online. You can go to, it's gocolumbiamo.com, and then if you're on the home page, at the top there, you click City Government, and there's a little, it says meetings at the top right. If you click on that, and it'll say City Council meetings, and it'll say somewhere on here you can actually view recorded ones online if you skim down. So you can actually watch and skim through it, which is nice, instead of having to watch the whole, what time did they start?
We started on this issue at about 9:30.
But the meeting starts at 6.
Oh, the meeting starts at 7.
At 7, and it was going until midnight, so you can skip to the pertinent parts, which is kind of nice.
Midnight,
it was, So, if you're interested and want to hear for yourself kind of how things went down, feel free to look that up at gocolumbiamo.com. It's your government. Take an interest.
That's right.
What do you think about, at the City Council meeting, Frankie Miner got up and had some interesting statistics. The argument that these beds are needed, that the university needs these beds for students, and that's a real need here in Columbia, more student beds. Do either of you know enough about that or remember enough about what Frankie said to speak to that issue as an argument for? That's one of the arguments for pushing this through. We need those beds. MU needs those beds. We have to be nice to the university, and the students have nowhere to sleep.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I'm not a real estate developer.
No, me either.
But I do research on demography, amongst other things, and am the principal investigator of the Missouri State Census Data Center and have worked in the area of demographic analysis for a long time now. So while I am not a bed counter per se, I do have a pretty clear idea of what's happening with the general demographic trends. And the simplest way to say it, and I've been sort of honing my message on this over the last couple months, is that the baby boomers' kids are through college now, and Gen Xers' kids are the group that are starting and will be the generation for the next couple decades making their way through. And that is a smaller generation and a smaller cohort than the boomers' kids. And there's just no way around that. And it's not just true here in Missouri or in Columbia, it's true actually over lots of the world, but
just
certainly around the country. And it is possible that recruitment could change, and there's some marketing sort of strategies and pricing strategies. There could be some political activities within the state in terms of, changing the size and scale of campuses within the Missouri public university system that would pour more undergraduates into the university, But those are not things that are immediately, obviously, on the horizon. Those are not things that are part of the higher education policy conversation right now.
And you're on campus quite a bit.
I work on campus.
So you would hear if there was some major movement, probably.
Right. So, I don't think that we're going to have a precipitous drop in undergraduate population, but I think it's going to follow demographic trends like it has for the last 150 years.
Sorry, put it that way.
So when it comes back to the bed issue, the story is more about where there are beds in the community and where we want beds in the community for students. And one of the things that Frankie pointed out that is interesting and worth thinking about is the university itself has a plan for how much it can. Right? They've got.
He had a bunch of numbers. I should have listened to the meeting again and jotted these down.
He had a bunch of numbers, but
7,700 was the biggest number. I remember that much.
Right. They're going to take down Jones, Laws, and Lathrop over the past several years and replace those 3 buildings with 5 new ones. And they've got a couple of other projects. And so in the short term,
they're adding 350 beds total.
Well, he mentioned more than that.
Did he?
More.
It was from 6,000 something to 7,700 was the top.
It was the total number of beds.
I remember that number clearly.
Including all that's built already.
I think what's really new and interesting in this conversation, and I've been paying attention to land use issues in this town for a long time, for sort of an embarrassingly long time now, but we're talking about sort of moving students around more so than making space for
people who are homeless or something.
Or for a long time, we built for students on the periphery. We built for them down at the end of Rock Quarry Road. We built for them out on, most recently, out along the 63 corridor.
Yeah, I didn't even know those were there. And I drove down the other day, and there's these huge apartment buildings. Where did these come from?
Right.
It's like aliens dropped them, because I've never even saw them going up, and they're done.
Right.
I don't know how I missed that. I blinked and missed it. I was shocked.
So I don't know how many more beds we're going to need in total, but to me the question is more about what do we want to have happen in our historic downtown, and do we want to keep a historic downtown? And if we turn it into a student neighborhood or any other kind of neighborhood, we're still really changing the characteristic of the central business district.
Well, and I think, too, the other thing we talked about is that we've got all this student housing out in the periphery.
What happens to that if they move out of that and into downtown?
Well, exactly.
Would be my question.
If the students want to move into these newer downtown apartments,
which are not going to be inexpensive.
No, they're not. They're
not initially.
No,
but
right.
Then what's going to happen to all those?
That's what
those
I wondered.
buildings, and they're not well-built buildings. I mean, they are
built quickly. That's what we can say for a fact.
Very quickly,
yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's a big concern too, because we don't want a bunch of vacant buildings out in the hinterlands just rotting away.
Yeah. I think that's a valid concern. Just as a layperson, I've wondered that myself. Yeah. So this leads to another argument. I believe the mayor made this argument. Who said that we don't like students? Columbia doesn't like students. Do you remember that coming up at the meeting?
I think Jenny said that.
Or was it? I don't remember. But somebody at the meeting said, if we don't pass this development, it makes it look like Columbia, maybe it was in Jenny's speech, we don't like students.
It's a, that's a reflexive sort of knee-jerk response to having somebody disagree with you, and it's really an unproductive one. And, you know, I've worked in higher education most of my adult life. I actually have a child who is an MU student right now, and know her and many of her friends for a very long time, and I like them. I like them quite a lot.
And I have a daughter that went through MU.
Yeah. So it's not that people don't like students, but it is that we expect to have a culture in our community where we have expectations for students to be good neighbors. And one of the concerns about having this very high density of students downtown and really nobody else is they're not surrounded by a culture of expectation of good neighborly behavior. So, you know, I challenge anybody to do a little anthropology and come spend a regular semester Friday or Saturday night downtown between 10 a.m. and 2 a.m. and just kind of take a look at what it looks like.
10 p.m.
10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And it looks, you know, these kids behave in our town and our downtown very, very differently than they behave in their own neighborhoods and their own communities. And I think we like them quite a lot, but we also expect them to be good neighbors.
I can say from personal experience, since the big apartment complex went in just south of Ragtag, which is about the only place I go downtown because I don't get out that much, but I'm often there, and I know from personal experience when I'm walking to the parking garage across the street there, I have seen people out on their balconies drop things from their balconies on passersby, hoot and holler and call out to randomly to women walking down the street. I never used to feel unsafe walking down there, but I certainly would never walk under those balconies after what I've seen.
You need to look down at your feet, too, and make sure you're not stepping in anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's really has, the character of that spot has changed drastically. I can vouch for that, having been down there late at night and seeing what's going on there. And so it concerns me that that same culture would carry right on down the way, because they're pretty much parallel with where this new development would be going in, just a few blocks over.
Right. And
it's a similar development.
Sure, so. and I've thought about this and talked about this for a long time. It's not just about this development. Is we don't do young people any favor as a community to let them sort of isolate themselves unsupervised. And behave in ways that they know that they wouldn't or couldn't or shouldn't act anywhere else. It's not, you know, we're not perpetual spring break downtown.
Right.
Well, and that's the other point.
Or are we? I mean, or are we?
Yeah.
We were going to be, I think. I fear.
It makes me, I'll just say it makes me really angry when we get into having this specious argument about whether or not people like students. We like them just fine, and we have every right to both have a central business district, a downtown that is welcoming to the entire community.
And a university.
And a university.
Yeah.
So we're not asking anything unreasonable. We're asking them to behave. And the other thing that Frankie mentioned that I think is super important to mention in the conversation about whether or not we should have lots of students downtown is this false idea that there's something directly related to proximity to campus. that is good for students academically, socially, etc. What Frankie said, and he said really clearly, and it's really important that everybody understands, is what helps students in terms of their living space is the wraparound services that hold them accountable academically, hold them accountable socially, help keep them focused on their studies, on being good citizens, on taking care of themselves, on being productive, and putting them in private housing right next to downtown without any of those services is only going to let them not take very good care of themselves right downtown.
Right. I completely agree with that. Stevens moved a few years back to requiring all students to live on campus for 4 years. And so at that point, I was adjuncting over there, and I actually read through a couple of the studies they were touting, and it was all about being on campus, having an RA that checks on you, expectations of behavior, other students and RAs to help kind of police your behavior if you were not able to do it yourself. That's not going to happen in an apartment building. I absolutely agree. That's not going to achieve this magical oasis of student learning and engagement. Is not going to happen.
Right. And we deserve to have an honest community conversation about those kind of policy decisions.
Right. We've got about 10 minutes, and I want to make sure we get to everything you ladies wanted to talk about. The most important thing, which we spent the whole 10 minutes practically talking about when you were here a month ago, Tracy, you've got a second petition going. Maybe we should move at this point and talk about that. And your upcoming effort to get the signatures. Is this a good time to move to that?
Sure.
It is.
DeAnna, do you want to take a turn?
Sure. We do have another petition. We're going to be at the farmers market. We've got, till June 9th to get 3,209 signatures. And
that's not very long. Was that 2 weeks?
It's 20 days.
Right. 20 days.
Yeah.
All right. From the council meeting?
Yeah, from the council meeting.
Okay.
So, and we'll be at Art in the Park, and we'll be
that's nice, 'cause there's a lot of people there.
Peddlers Jamboree this weekend.
Yeah.
All right.
So we'll be at a lot of public areas. And
so if you're at those events, look for people with clipboards.
Correct.
If you're interested, that's where you sign.
Yeah.
You need to be a registered voter
within the city
limits to sign. It doesn't do them any favors if you sign it and you're not a registered voter in the city limits, because then they think they've got a signature and then they verify it and they don't.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So
now, if we end up being short again, we do have another 14 days to
come up with
the extra signatures.
Yeah.
But I hope people are really unhappy about the way things are being run in Columbia, and the way the citizens are not being listened to. And I think, that's just happening more and more and more. I think we're just feeling very disenfranchised, and people need to realize that most people don't go to city council meetings, and most people don't watch them on TV or go back and review them. And they don't know how the citizens of Columbia are treated at those council meetings. And sometimes it's appalling.
Yeah, I've been shocked.
So I just think people need to pay a lot of attention, because we're getting the short end of the stick here.
Right. And I don't think we talked about it, DeAnna, when we were talking about the new petition and why we started it and the process issue, but the other piece of it that we need to say really clearly that was a problem with process this time around is in the new ordinance that was passed on Monday night is having what could be called a poison pill, and it's a stipulation in the ordinance that says if citizens choose to petition this ordinance and that petition is successful, then we'll revert and the first ordinance is good again.
Now, this was confusing to me when the city attorney tried to explain it. It sounded to me like the city attorney said, if your first petition was successful, that first bill would be dead, that the city wasn't allowed to repeal it, but the citizens could. So was she misleading when she said?
Well, she certainly wasn't trying to be super clear.
I mean, I'm a fairly reasonably intelligent person, and I was having trouble figuring out.
I was the one asking the questions, and I came away not realizing what she said.
So if your second effort is successful of collecting these 3,209 signatures, and you successfully repeal the second development agreement what's going to happen?
Then it's worth noting that none of this has ever been case tested.
Right.
So there's a little bit of
Wiggle room or
making it up as we go on everybody's part, just for all fairness.
Yeah.
But essentially what they've tried to say in it is if the petitioners are successful the second time, then we're going to not consider the first, we're going to consider the first ordinance not repealed. So
even though you had a petition that repealed it.
So what she's saying is, we're not going to repeal the first petition now. We're just going to sign the second development agreement, or the first development agreement. We're just going to sign the second development agreement. And if you all are successful with the second development agreement, then we're going to go back and we're going to use the first development agreement, which essentially...
But we already had it was validated now, right?
Yes.
That the citizens officially did what they needed to do to repeal that one. So
Correct.
How could they reactivate something that was repealed? I don't understand that.
We don't know.
And that's not how I understood the city attorney to be explaining it.
Okay.
And I'm not saying I misunderstood.
Right.
I may have misunderstood. I thought she was trying to say that the city government couldn't repeal the first one, but the petition the citizens' position would still be valid. But the city was protecting itself from a lawsuit with that.
She did say that.
Right. I think
with that loophole or something.
Right. I think what they're trying to say is then it will go to a referendum. There's no way this council is going to vote to repeal it, and that way it's the voters' fault, not our fault, sort of thing.
Well, okay.
Right.
Let's do that.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. And we're not done yet either. Right. I mean, there's more to come even immediately. There will be a press conference tomorrow that we don't know exactly what's going to happen, so we're speculating a little bit here. But we've been led to believe that some members of council are going to announce that if the second petition is successful, then they're just going to say to OPUS, well, never mind, you didn't really need to come to council in the first place, so here's your building permits, you go for it. And I think that people are just going to be fit to be tied, as my grandmother used to say, to find yet one more end run around due process, around our both constitutional and charter right to participate in the process and to determine our local government and have voice.
Well, there was a reason to come before council. That's why they had the rule that people developing downtown had to come before council. Because there wasn't a reason for it. With the infrastructure problems, they wouldn't have been there to start with.
That's right. If
they were trying to build out in the hinterlands, to use DeAnna's word, this wouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, and it is true that typically a development like OPUS, if downtown had proper infrastructure in place, they could have just got their building permits and gone for it. But for months, the city manager has required developments of this scale to go through because we don't have infrastructure in place, and to try and get them to contribute and pay for part of it. So you can't have it both ways.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting now and in the long run for a little bit.
And what's interesting too is that if they don't have a development agreement, they also won't be paying anything toward the infrastructure.
Right.
Which was a pittance to begin with, $450,000.
Out of millions and millions.
Over $10 million. Yeah.
So.
So parting shot would be, look out for a petition. If you're angered by this, if you're a citizen and you're listening and you would like your voice to be heard, look for the petition gatherers at the Peddlers Jamboree, at the Farmers and Artisans Market. No, the Columbia Farmers Market.
On Saturday
and the Farmers
morning.
and Artisans Market on Sunday morning.
We'll be outside of Uprise sometimes.
We're typically at the Arc sometimes.
Right.
So.
And we've got a Facebook page. We've got a Twitter account.
Okay, so what do they find you on Facebook?
Right now it's Repeal 6214.
Repeal 6214.
All one, no spaces.
Run together, and you can search for that, and it'll come right up. That'd be a good place to go volunteer, too, if you're willing to carry a petition to some of your neighbors.
That would be super.
Because I didn't understand this until I looked at it. If you're carrying the petition around, you can't sign it. You have to sign someone else's.
You have to sign somebody else's.
Which is like, okay. All right, so that's a good thing to know. Don't sign one and then turn it in. You've got to sign someone else's. You and a friend
have to be notarized.
Right? Yeah, and they have to be notarized, which is another step.
But we provide a notary also.
Right. Yep. Okay. All right. Last minute thank you to whoever's tuned in from Pequot Lakes, Minnesota. Welcome to Women's Issues. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this has been scintillating for you, listening to us talk about local politics. DeAnna Walkenbach and Tracy Greever-Rice, thank you for spending an hour with us tonight, talking about, I think, some pretty up-and-coming, important, pressing city issues that are facing downtown Columbia and anybody who loves downtown Columbia. That was the one thing at the City Council meeting I thought was so interesting, that so many people spoke said, I love Columbia. I'm here because I love downtown. What other place do you live that people come in the middle of the night, at midnight, to speak at a City Council meeting after sitting there for hours, and that's their attitude? I love where I live. So it's a great place to be.
It is.
Let's keep it that way.
Yeah.
Let's work as a town to get what we want, get the ordinances we need to guide the planning we want. I think this is a great opportunity to get that conversation started, get those things in place, and make it something even more lovable, don't you think?
I agree. And it'll be easier for everyone when they know exactly what
the rules
they
are.
have to do and what the rules are.
Yeah, I agree.
Sarah, thanks so much.
Well, thanks for coming. It's always interesting, especially Tracy's, I don't know how many times you've been on here, 10. I can always call her if there's something going on. Hey, Tracy, you want to come talk? And she always will. So it's great. And she always has facts, and she's smart. So welcome. Now, maybe you'll now become a repeat offender over here on women's issues.
Well,
DeAnna.
thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
KOPN live hit the line. The imagination station with power pot pats and penguin tracks. Me and Mo, it's not just radio, it's strict radio.
This is Dr. Royda Croce, psychologist, gerontologist, with a prescription for longevity prepared by the editors of the newsletter Health After 50. Cultivate satisfying relationships. Studies show that positive social interaction, including sexual activity for those who desire it, lowers the level of stress hormones in the blood, helps preserve cognitive function, and prevents depression. And consider preventive medicine. Certain drugs can help prevent at least 3 common problems. When lifestyle changes aren't enough, drug therapy should be considered for high blood pressure and high cholesterol. Biophosphonates can protect the skeletal system in men and women at risk for osteoporosis. And many older adults should take low-dose aspirin to decrease the risk of heart disease and possible colon cancer. Ask your doctor. This is Royda Croce for KOPN.
Hi, my name is Heather, and you're listening to Women's Issues, Women's Voices, every Thursday night at 7 p.m., KOPN 89.5 FM, Columbia.
This is Girl Scout Troop 193 from Ashland, Missouri, and you're listening to KOPN, Columbia, Missouri.